everybody. Welcome to another episode of Lorebeards. Apologize that there was nothing last week. Had a lot of family stuff going on, and there was Scarborough Fair and just a whole bunch of nonsense happening around here. But we're here this week. I'm very, very excited for this episode. We've got, I don't know how we keep finding them, but we found another Andy for Warhammer. So Andy, if you'd be so kind as to just kind of introduce yourself for everyone who may not be familiar with you, and we'll take it from there.
Sure. So yeah, my name is Andy Leask. My actual day job is I'm a teacher. I'm a head of English. But in terms of Warhammer, I'm a writer. I wrote for Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay 4th edition, part of the core book, a lot of the starter set, various parts of Enemy Within before I kind of moved on from that. Nowadays, I'm part of Rookery Publications, so I do the weekly Inside the Rookery streams with Andy Law and Lindsay Law, who you've had on previous Lorebeards episodes, as well as we're working on the Called Crown campaign and various other things that are still bubbling away with Rookery Publications. And I'm also playing in Andy Law's LAWhammer actual play of the Enemy Within, playing Father Leopold, a warrior priest of Sigmar.
Yeah, it's such a good character. It's I love Father Leopold so much. Well, that's excellent. So you've been involved in like a lot of really important things, especially for people that are coming in to Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay for the first time, which is happening a lot right now, which is awesome. Like I'm getting tons of messages, especially from people, whether they're watching like the series that I'm doing or the series that y'all are doing, which if you all haven't, you should be watching the LAWhammer series. It is like, it's basically like the Critical Role type version of Wolfrip, as far as I'm concerned. Even if they're constantly fighting against microphones and cameras, but it's it's so wonderful.
Every week we make marginal gains, right?
Yeah.
Every week we get a little bit better,
a little closer.
The biggest issue for us is space, actually, because we're literally playing inside Andy Law's living room, and he's set up a frame and we've got a big table, but all the mics and cables are so close to each other that the interference.
Huddle.
Yeah.
But working on kind of the intro set stuff, you've been heavily involved with Ubersreik, I assume. So could you kind of talk to us a little bit about what was kind of the idea behind kind of was starting with Ubersreik, and what do you think really sets it up as such a perfect starting place for people to kind of begin with their Warhammer experience?
Cool. Well, yeah, at the point we were doing the starter set, so obviously the core book was sort of done and was sort of in PDF format, and we were working on the starter set. And there have been a lot of good starter sets for RPGs over the years, and particularly there have been a lot of really good ones recently. And I would like to think that the Wolfrip one maybe contributed to some of the changes that you get in other RPG starter sets now, because for a long time starter sets were just designed for people who were new to roleplay. So if you already played Wolfrip, if you had the core book and you already knew the world, why would you need the starter set, right? You already understand role playing. And it was a conscious decision by Andy and I when we wrote, and it is important, like our writing relationship, we very much are writing partners. So and Lindsay as well, in that one of us may have written it, but we have all of our DNA is in it. There's a lot of back and forth. But when we were coming up with that, what we wanted was the starter set to yes, be accessible to people who've never played before. So it has this wonderful adventure from T.S. Lukart, Making the Rounds, which is deliberately, a slightly more railroady perhaps than more experienced gamers might like, because it's meant to be. It's for new players to bring them into the world, to force them to see the different things that make Warhammer, so they can then go on and play something more expansive. But at the same time, we wanted to have material there, so if you were an experienced GM or you had an experienced party, it was still worth your while using the starter set. Or if you ran through Making the Rounds and you wanted to carry on playing in Ubersreik, you could. And I've had, over the years, lots of lovely people message me saying that's exactly what happened. They intended to just do Making the Rounds and then run on to Enemy Within, and they just got bogged down in Ubersreik because there was so much stuff to do that they stayed there, which is lovely. So that was our rationale. In terms of why Ubersreik, obviously, part of that you have to acknowledge the appeal of Vermintide. The fact
it's such a lovely crossover there. Yeah. Like it really feels like there's been a lot of back and forth between y'all's original writings and the Fat Shark team.
Oh, absolutely! They were terrific. They were so friendly, so helpful. Andy mentioned when he was on, they sent us over like a developer build so we could just fly around their 3D model of Ubersreik, and that was so helpful for me particularly. So I have a very minor sort of a sort of neurodiversity thing. I have what's called aphantasia. So I virtually no
very well. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I see nothing, and I only found this out like 3-4 years ago. I thought everybody was like that.
And Father Lorebeards an auger.
I know, right? Like, what's up with that? Yeah. But I definitely found for situating myself in the geography, that plus the kind of map that Andy gave me, like those two things were really useful for me as I was writing. And it's an ideal setting, I think, because somewhere like Altdorf or Nuln or Middenheim is almost too big, too iconic for a starting adventure. Be overwhelming. Every district in Altdorf is like the size of Ubersreik. It'd just be too much. But also because of the political situation that's being set up for the enemy within, with what's just happened in Ubersreik. So with the Jungfreunds having been kicked out, the Altdorf troops having swept in and taken control, what you've got there as a setting is this incredibly rich, like febrile place where there is kind of a power vacuum going on. Like chaos has kind of entered with a small c rather than a big C, although also with a big C. But with a small c as well. So you've got in that city, you have got people who were loyal to the Jungfreunds and thinks what's happened was a travesty. You've got the actual Altdorfers who've come in, and who knows what they think about it. You've got other people in the city who just want to get on with living their lives. You've got people who are deeply troubled by what all of this might mean to them, kind of socially, and then also because there's a power vacuum, you've got others expanding to fill that. So you've got the likes of the underworld boss, the Baron, who's sort of in the slums underneath the bridge. You've got the Lowhaven clan of Halflings, which are sort of my thing I'm proudest of having come up with them kind of expanding their kind of underworld empire as well. So it's an ideal setting for telling stories, and it was a lot of fun to write because of that.
Yeah, I think what you said earlier is such a key point as well for new and experienced players alike, is that Ubersreik really is kind of one of these amazing things where like it can be very simple. It can be a very straightforward experience to like get a new GM and new players used to the setting and kind of get you ready to be shipped off further. But it also like, man, you can spend literally an entire campaign in Ubersreik. It's like multiple years of real world time in Ubersreik very easily.
Oh, absolutely, because you've got the core story there, like in making the rounds, and then there's all the pre-gen characters, and they've all got their own like sort of mini adventure hook that you could go off and kind of finish off their personal stories. But then, a very clear part of the brief was that every single location would have 2 adventure seeds in it, and some of those are incredibly minor, simple little things, and some of those are potentially an entire 10 session.
I really want to do a campaign at some point around the Bog King. The Bog King is such an awesome, such a like one of my favorite potential characters.
I genuinely feel like Andy and I were slightly delirious at the point we were writing the Bog King, because we'd sort of come up with it, and then we just kept for the rest of that night, and honestly, ever since, we would just every now and then just look at each other and go, Bog King, and it. Yeah.
He's that perfect mix of genuinely terrifying, but also for anyone that doesn't know, the Bog King, there is literally a giant octopus monster that is freakishly intelligent, has like psychic communication abilities, that lives in the sewers of Altdorf, and he can absolutely like slither tentacles up through toilets and kill people when they're least expecting it.
And that was actually that was one of the fun sections. Like initially when I was writing, like I knew I was going to be writing the locations in the town, and I knew I was going to be writing locations in the duchy around the town as well. But then Andy was like, "Oh, let's put a section in with some cults that are kind of hanging around," and that was a lot of fun coming up with kind of what those different cults would be. And we didn't want them just to be obvious chaos cults. Like there are some in there, your classic archetypal Warhammer chaos cults. Lots of sort of Tzeentchian stuff going on, because that's my favorite god to kind of play with. But then we were like, actually having, say, like the Yellow Bellies in as the kind of Skaven sort of collaborating former slave sort of spy network.
Yeah.
that was a lot of fun. And then Bog King was the left field one, and we're like, it's so good. And it is again, it is consistently the one whenever people have used it. Andy and I get messages on Discord, on Twitter, or whatever, just saying how much fun they've had with the Bog King.
I very much slot the Bog King in my one-day Fishman. Like, listen, when Total War comes out with the Fishman race, the Bog King is the starting character. Perfect.
We even had plans. Obviously, we'd left, weren't working with Cubicle 7 by the time they got to doing their Altdorf book. But had we done it, our plan was to upgrade the Bog King to the Bog Emperor, and have him having moved to Altdorf and become even more powerful. But
amazing.
Yeah, but sadly, was never to be. But yeah.
Maybe in LAWhammer it'll show up.
Yeah, maybe. God, I hope not. No, I'd be on the receiving end of it. No, thank you.
So, kind of to touch back on something earlier you mentioned, because it's a subject I love hearing more about, because it's so rarely heard about, especially for people. A lot of the people watching Lorebeards tend to be their first interaction with Warhammer tends to be through the Total War series, and they're like slowly but surely kind of getting into other things out beyond that, where they're like learning about the role play, or the novels and everything, with the old world coming back. But something that not enough people get to hear about, because it doesn't really show up in Total War and the actual battle game, of course, are halflings. Which I love the halflings. They're very, very important in my opinion, even though like it kind of felt like Games Workshop created them and then realized that they didn't really make sense for when Warhammer started to get darker and darker in like 7th and 8th edition, so they kind of got pushed over. But they are such a fundamental part of the roleplay experience and really the setting itself. Like the Empire isn't the Empire in my opinion without the halflings. And they have that relationship with the ogres and all that stuff. But I think my favorite aspect of them is when you have criminal halflings. And I was hoping you could kind of run people through what kind of led you, when talking about the LAWhavens specifically, like what led you to go, okay, I want them to be halflings, and this is how they're kind of going to develop into a threat. How do you make halflings threatening?
That's good. Well, so I suppose if you go back like far enough in terms of the genesis of Warhammer, and you spoke a little bit with this about Lindsay actually when it came to elves, that the influence was not subtle in the early days of Warhammer, right? It was Michael Moorcock and it was Tolkien smashed together, and then the role playing game came along and smashed Call of Cthulhu into that as well. And you look at around about the time of kind of Wifrit First Edition, like that's what it is. It is Michael Moorcock's idea of kind of chaos and everything. It is Tolkien and it is Call of Cthulhu smashed together in this pseudo-European kind of fantasy world. But over the years, and that's not a bad thing. Like that,
no, it's great.
They took inspiration from great sources and made a brilliant world. But as time went on, they obviously wanted to develop it in a way that would make that world more unique. So the Warhammer elves are not the same as Tolkien elves. That may have been the genesis of them, but they're not anymore. And similarly with halflings, like obviously their genesis is the hobbits of kind of the Hobbit and Lord of the Rings. But they're very much not that anymore. Yeah. That's where they began, but that's very much not where they are. And there's various things like on the like kind of meta scale, like on the kind of the entire history of the Warhammer world. There's the idea of what were they created by the old ones for? Like what's their purpose, right? They've got resistance to chaos. They've got were they just there to kind of to endure, to kind of be like little worker bees almost that could kind of handle the fact that the world was kind of falling to chaos or whatever. I was always less interested in that. I'm more interested in, okay, so if you're playing a halfling, like what is it? What does that mean? Like, what does it mean to be a halfling? And how do you, like, the tension that we've always got when we're writing particularly in a world like Warhammer that is so well known, that has so many influences that it wears in its sleeves, is you want to simultaneously play into the stereotypes, but also subvert and resist them at the same time.
Difficult balance, but it's y'all like the Wolfrip especially does such a good job of striking it on a regular basis, which is just stupid impressive.
It's hard, but it's a definite, certainly at the beginning of 4th edition, it's a definite design goal. It was a definite, like, how do we exploit that? And then sometimes you want people to assume that someone is the baddie, but they're not the baddie, but then sometimes actually they are the baddie. Yeah. And with halflings, the classic thing, as they kind of evolved, like there's obviously what they were in Tolkien, and particularly Bilbo Baggins was a burglar, except he wasn't really a burglar. That's just what Gandalf said he was.
Yeah, Warhammer's like, but what if he actually?
Yeah, and certainly like halfling rogues and halfling thieves are a thing in D&D as well. And for a long time in Wifrup games, the rules sort of reflected that, right? Like they had the right stats to be good at being thieves, right? They were sneaky, they were good at stealth, they were good at picking pockets. They, so the rules were saying, yeah, halflings are good at being thieves, but there wasn't really that cultural explanation in terms of why would halflings, beyond just the need to survive, like why would they be like thieves? Why would they be good at that? And so we looked at that. So when we were thinking about their kind of culture that they have, and the idea that they live in these clans, so that you have I think we settled on 8 clans that were kind of dominant in the right Kingdom. You might get occasional other ones, but there were sort of the 8 sort of main ones, and those were your broad stereotypes in terms of like kind of what their role was in society. You had this lot were like the noble ones, this lot were like the merchant ones, this lot were the shady ones, and but we're like, well, why would they have that clan structure? There are lots of halflings, and we went down this route of the idea of them living like cheek by jowl with each other. They almost were like pack animals. Yeah, that they loved being packed in closely with their kind of kin, and everything belonged to the clan. Everything belonged together. There was this sense of collective ownership, this kind of almost slightly anarcho-communist kind of streak running through them, where all property is theft, essentially.
It's such a that's such a brilliant strike from like the old, because like they're halflings in the older Black Library novels, and they're just like, oh, halflings they're foul and they're thieves, and it's like it's not always the case, but it's often the case. But that's such a clever way to explain it, of like, well, no, they don't think they're stealing. Like from their perspective, it's just everything belongs to everybody. So why is that a big deal?
You had a sausage. I was hungry, so I took your sausage and I ate it. Okay, and if you were hungry and I had a sausage, you take it and eat it, and that's all fine. And that's their kind of rationale. And like one of the things, like in my experience, obviously when you're dealing with a licensed IP, everything that I wrote had to go through Andy as the producer, make sure he was happy with it, had to go through Cubicle 7, make sure they were happy with it, and also had to go through GW to make sure they were happy with it. And very little that I think we walked the line quite well. So Andy and I particularly would write things in a way that we were confident we'd get through approval, so we got very little that we had to take out. And the thing that I am still amazed and proudest that I have managed to get through, in the Archives of the Empire Halfling Clans article that I wrote, it's in canon now that halflings are polyamorous, and that they exist in this sort of polyamorous love nests together. And it makes sense. Yeah, and like it's very much how we'd envisaged them. It was how they were going to be in our head canon anyway. And I was like, well, let's just write it in and see if I was fully expecting GW to take that sentence out, and they did not. And I'm like, well, good, because it's it's not presented in a salacious way or anything. Like it's just presented as sort of part of their culture.
We share everything here.
Exactly. And also the fact that they like it's things like people do things according to their skills, right? So not like I think. To not to get too serious for a second, but if we think about the real world, there are people out there who are parents who might not be the best parents, right? The way it would work in a halfling community, if you're all living together, would be like, well, okay, this person's clearly not, so they have no interest in being a parent, so they won't. Someone else living in the house, because there's 80 of you living in a room, so someone else there will be who's good at the nurturing and the caring will be the parent, and that person's actually good at going out and picking pockets, so they're going to go out and pick pockets, and that person's actually good at haggling and making deals, so they're going to kind of run the legitimate front, and that was sort of the underpinning behind it, was that they were a big mass and everything they did was kind of for the clan, and they very much believed in that. And that also then means if you're playing a halfling, you just imprint that onto your party. So your party become your mobile clan, and that's why you have loyalty to this group of humans or dwarfs or elves or whatever. They have become like your clan, and therefore you are looking after them. But also you will happily take anything that they've got, and you don't mean anything by it. And the Lowhavens in particular, like that was an intent to, as you say, to add menace, particularly. So to go beyond the cheeky chappy burglar, got to pick a pocket or two type, more cheerful thievery of the halflings was to add that little bit of menace in. And I really like, and again, I'm not shy about this. I've spoken about it a lot on our Rookery streams. Like, I'm an absolute magpie when it comes to stealing little Easter eggs and references from like high culture and low culture, right? So that you are as likely to find like a Shakespeare reference as you are to find a reference to some TV show.
Well, I honestly think that's when Warhammer's at its strongest in a lot of ways. Is this weird melting pot of just all these different real world and mythical meeting places.
Yeah, and like for the Low Havens particularly, like it really began in the very, very obvious homage to The Sopranos in Ubersreik. So there's like a deli, like a sausage shop, which is supposedly run by a Chilean family. But then that was so that I could give it a name that sounded like the place in The Sopranos. But actually, everybody knows secretly it's halflings that are doing the cooking. What people don't know is that actually the whole thing is a front for the kind of Low Havens, and actually it's being used as a hub for their kind of like organized crime network in Ubersreik. And that was sort of the genesis of it. Because then I was like, right, so if it's like The Sopranos, then they're like, you know, organized crime, and like not. I hate to add, I know nothing about real organized crime, but like very much drawing on like media presentations of the kind of mafia and various organized crime rings, and that was how I kind of went with it. Along with that, there was also the thing about halfling names that was kind of already established, and we can definitely codified, which is that because you know they have like really long what's the word, like not anachronistic, but like unexpectedly highfalutin first names that then get shortened to something that's much more silly. So everybody knows them as their little name, but actually they've got a big fancy classical Latin sounding kind of nickname. And that allowed us to have quite a bit of irony in terms of what their nicknames were. So like, you know, one of the most ruthless Low Haven enforcers is called Mercy, for instance, and things like that. So you were able to have a bit of fun with the fact that people might meet a halfling called Mercy and think that but actually they're a racketeer who would break your wrist.
The nicer the name, probably the more dangerous the halfling.
Exactly. And it was a real evolution, like in terms of like, you know, because I was saying, you know, I was involved with the halflings in the core book. I was really involved in the Low Havens and kind of fleshing them out in Ubersreik. And then when it came to doing that article for the first volume of the Archives of the Empire, like I really wanted to kind of flesh out, because a lot of the feedback I was getting was, oh, you know, like how can you make a halfling racketeer? Halflings are so squishy. Halflings die in combat. Halflings have to avoid combat. And you're like, well, not if you've got the right combination of skills and talents. Like Warhammer is very much designed in a particular way. They're smaller, which means if they've got fewer wounds, but they're harder to hit.
Yeah, so that's the thing. Is just don't get hit.
You boost your dodge. You go on the defensive as much as possible until you build up advantage. You take skills like, you know, like particularly for the Low Havens, you take talents like dirty fighting and knuckle dusters and things, which means you're doing a surprising amount of damage. And you know, so suddenly you look like you're just this innocent little halfling, and then you smack somebody and you're doing like more damage than a pit fighter. You know, it's again,
dirty fighting is such a such a nasty talent.
Yeah, but you would have to, like, if you were a halfling, if you were like, you know, 3.5 foot tall in a world full of people that are like up to 6 foot tall or even bigger, like, how are you going to survive if you're going to fight them? You don't fight them, but if you are going to fight them, you fight dirty. You use every advantage that is there. So that was sort of the rationale behind them, was that they were like survivors essentially, and they had all like kind of almost adapted. And like, again, that's why there were all the different clans that had their different niche in the Empire society. They had adapted to fill a space. Like there was a need for a space, and those halflings adapted to fill that space. And particularly with the Low Havens, then the power vacuum in Ubersreik meant that they were using that to spread out and proliferate into the Reichland, because their kind of background was actually they came from Nuln, and you know they'd had a little presence here, and suddenly there's a power vacuum, and so they're exploding out.
And everything you said, it opens up so many great usages for halflings, whether you're playing as one or just have, if you're GM using them, of like halflings make for a pretty intimidating intelligence network that is a lot more subtle than like the really Machiavellian, you know, big ones that are a lot more like, they're sneaky but they're still obvious at the same time. It's like, oh yeah, you're going to expect the big bads up in Altdorf to be, you know, manipulating the Imperial Post or doing all this other stuff. You might not be expecting that the halfling pie seller is part of a network of halflings who pass along information very reliably. and they know a lot.
Exactly. And you never see it coming with them because they smile, they're charming, they're gregarious, they're tiny. Our inbuilt human response to see them almost like a child means that you kind of keep letting them get away with things that you shouldn't let them get away with.
I still think I can't remember the character's name off the top of my head, but I still think my favorite halfling I've ever seen in Warhammer media depicted was, there's literally a Gotrek and Felix book where there's a dangerous halfling. Like, to Gotrek, he's a genuine threat, and he's a gang leader. And they explain it as like, he's the only real halfling in this gang, but because he's a halfling, he's like 30 times more vicious than anybody else. Because for him, it's like he needs to remind everybody that he's threatening, despite the fact that he's small.
Yeah, exactly. So there's that ruthless streak. Yeah, exactly. And it was a lot of fun, like making those NPCs in the archives article to kind of show people how you could use, because there are, like, there's a lot of really good stuff about the rules in 4th edition. It's not exactly how we would have wanted it. Andy, as he spoke about before, like, it came on as producer partway through the process. We had some fixed deadlines, which meant that some of the book isn't laid out necessarily in as user friendly a way as we might like. There are some rules buried in the wrong chapters, and that was just a result of immovable deadlines. Basically, we were like, right, this chapter is locked now, we can't edit it, but we need this extra paragraph of rules. It's combat, but it relates to a weapon, so we'll put it in the weapon chapter instead. It's not ideal, but it was all we could do at the time. And because of that, though, it does mean that sometimes people miss some of the intersections between the moving parts and didn't see how you could balance things. So making those NPCs was sort of an attempt to begin the process of showing people how you could, like, without cheesing it, without doing anything particularly bizarre, you could just use the rules and options that were available to you within the careers to end up with characters that were feasible and were quite different. And like I did a Halfling Grave Robber as well, was one that I kind of did in there. And again, I was tickled with the idea of him having to carry a collapsible stepladder so you could get in and out of the graves. But like it began with that. I was like, that's funny. But then actually you looked at the talents, like, actually he's like a really solid character. He's not as dangerous as a racketeer might be, but actually, he's quite tough and he's quite survivable and he's got a lot of very useful skills. You're like, oh, I now want to play a Halfling Grave Robber. And that's my sort of yardstick, was if ever I was making an NPC or coming up with a concept, if by the end of kind of coming up with it, I was enthused and was like, I want to play that, then I'm like, I've probably done all right there. So
yeah, well, it's like, before I really had the chance to start speaking with you and like Steve D and like all these different people who like have a lot of really strong love for halflings. Like, I used to definitely be the kind of person that when I would be rolling like a random race, I'd be like, anything but a halfling, just because in my head all I'm thinking of is I'm gonna be so squishy. But now I'm genuinely itching to play one, because it's like the combination of things I could do between like that really high fellowship and a lot of like the high agility and all these other stats that I can use well. There's a lot of really interesting things to do there, especially with high fellowship. Like, I don't think a lot of people realize how powerful it is in this game to be able to like genuinely manipulate NPCs, because there's so many talents that could be used even in combat scenarios, which is something that I love about Wolfrock compared to a lot of other games. I feel like a lot of other games, like, like with D&D, if you get into a fight, you have to fight. You got to fight your way out. With fantasy, like, it's like, no, I could like stack advantage and find an interesting way to get myself out of this situation instead of just smack until somebody dies. Yeah,
depending who you're fighting, but yeah.
I think I think there's been such an amazing job, especially like, because like Halflings were in 2nd edition, but I did not feel the allure of Halflings in 2nd. No. In 4th though, like it's there. Halflings feel very exciting. Like, I want to play a Badger Rider so bad. It's just such an awesome thing. Like, I thought Crooks fighting cocks was the coolest thing that Halflings are going to produce, and then I saw Badgers and I was like, oh my god, that's such a great idea.
I have to be clear, the Badgers is nothing to do with me. That was someone else, but yeah.
Well, but it's like, even just looking from like the core book of just like there's so many like awesome artworks in there that really show Halflings in all these really different positions that you wouldn't necessarily think of. Like, there's a good number of the fighting careers that have Halfling art. Yeah. Instead of just like a regular person to really like get the idea going for people.
There's one bit of art as well. I think it's in the starter set. I'm pretty sure it's a sort of like it runs over 2 pages in making the rounds. But I remember Andy like very specifically commissioning it and actually sending it back to be tweaked, because he really wanted to make the point of, if you actually look at a halfling, you couldn't mistake it for a human child, because yes, they have the height, but they have the width as well. Like they are very obviously not. They have like a denser, kind of like bone structure than a child would. They are more solid. So like he wanted that to be really, really clear in the art, because in some of the earlier art it was there, but it was maybe less obvious. And so there's literally like a whole bunch of like actual children running around, and in the middle of them there's a halfling, and it's really obvious that it's a halfling. And that was a deliberate point of contrast to kind of to pull it out.
That's that's great. So with Ubersreik, halflings, Bogenhofen, I imagine, was also something, because kind of being part of that little fat shark trade back and forth. So looking at Bogenhofen, really important city, important city for Wolfrup, and it's kind of increasingly become important. Fat Shark released like a whole set of maps for it that I love and hate those maps because they're such a nightmare to navigate.
Fair.
What for you? So like looking at those 2 cities in particular, what's kind of the process for exploring a city and like making it feel alive and giving people options to really like explore them while still having like, there are narratively important things to do, but like really bringing those to life and having like fun stories for people to explore and stuff like that?
Sure. So they're a very different process for the 2 of them, actually. So I'll start with Ubersreik. Like, as I say, that was designed to be like a starting sandbox for people to kind of play in. And there were some locations. So we were very, Andy and Lindsay, I think, have both talked about this when they were on, that we like doing our research. Like, we know a lot of this stuff anyway. We've been playing in a persistent Wolfrup campaign for like 15 years or whatever at that point. So we really felt like we lived in the Warhammer world. Like we knew it that well. But we specifically went back to looking at the novels, looking at the Vermintide games for Ubersreik, looking at, there were a number of scenarios for Wolfrup 3rd edition that were sort of set in there. So we got copies of all of those to look through. And although like what we were writing was 2512, so it was like maybe 10 years earlier than the stuff that was in 3rd edition, still looking and going, well, that would be the same. Or at that point, this would be, so that we definitely were trying not to contradict. And there are a couple of points where people have thought they've caught us out in a contradiction and they are wrong. But there are certain things to do with certain bloodlines. We deliberately made it look like people are thinking it's a different person, but it's all to do with like the twisty relationships within the bloodline. I don't want to say too much about that because it's a spoiler. But yeah, exactly. So we kind of we started off with those. So like in terms of like the mental map, like filled in the locations that we knew we had to have in because they were mentioned in Vermintide or they were mentioned in these books, and we're like, right, okay, we've got those locations in. And then it was a question of utility. Like an obvious one is you need a whole bunch of taverns because that's the classic role-playing staple. So like wherever you go around, you're going to find yourself a place where you can go and have some drinks and do some gossiping or whatever. So then we'll put those in. But then we started thinking about what the careers were, because the Wolfrup, Wolfrup in general is so driven by the career system. It's so integral to how you make a character, how you play a character, what your relationship is with the world that you're in. And in particular, in 4th edition, we tie that into social status as well. And so what we began thinking was, well, okay, if you've got a character who's in this career, like what type of location might they want to go to?
Okay.
If you've got a character in this type, where might they, within the obvious example, right? But we had the Dwarf, so the little kind of dwarven enclave, kind of within Ubersreik, and they were like, "Oh, well, let's put a shrine to Grimnir there because troll slayers are a thing. They're an iconic Warhammer thing. There's a good chance that a starting party is going to have a
very popular career, yeah,
exactly. So let's put a shrine to Grimnir in. So that means that even if you've got a dwarf who's feeling shamed and shunned and isn't going to want to go hang around with the other dwarfs, they have a reason to go and interact with those dwarfs because there's a shrine to Grimnir there to kind of encourage them to go there. So it's that type of thing, trying to go, oh, if someone's in the I don't know, in like some kind of like, river-based career, well, let's make sure that we detail stuff around the docks and the Stevedores Guild and the Teamsters, and let's have so firstly, let's have locations that they can go there. And then in terms of building the adventure hooks, let's have adventure hooks that will embroil them into the civil strife that is ongoing in Ubersreik. And wherever you look in Ubersreik, whatever building you look at, whatever adventure hooks you kind of look at underneath the locations, there's almost always tension, right? Because you need that in a role-playing game. You need antagonists, you need forces moving in either way. You need your players to either be fighting someone or stealing something from someone or returning something to someone or protecting someone or betraying
it gives
someone.
That motion, that drive,
exactly. And then what you're able to do is you're able to have, like, because it's very much even more than writing a normal role-playing adventure, which in and of itself is a very different challenge from writing a story, because you're putting down the parts of a story like an IKEA kind of flat pack furniture thing, but you then let the people put that together to make whatever they want, right? And they might make a different chair than you made, but that's fine. Even more distributed than that, within the setting, there are hooks that you could just follow that hook and that's it. But actually, the hook over there is on a similar thing. And if you played through that one and then you played through that one, that might lead you to that location, which actually has another hook that then pays off to something else. And what you've got is, like, buried underneath it, these little invisible links between different parts of the city, between different social classes, between different organizations, guilds, groups. And all of that is designed to basically lure that party in to staying in Ubersreik and getting embroiled in the kind of politics and sort of tension within it. So that was the goal with Ubersreik,
right?
And it was discreet. Bergenhafen was slightly different because it was already so iconic within the Wifrip community, right? It's the the main setting for Shadows of Bergenhafen, or Enemy in Shadows, as it was kind of put together for 4th edition in that book. And we joke a lot about this, and like Enemy Within is a very iconic campaign. It's the thing that really set the tone for what Wifrip was going to be. It's the thing that brought, in terms of those influences, it's the one that brought the Cthulhu in, the kind of the creeping, insidious kind of threat and cultists and so on. And a lot of people have played through the Enemy Within, or more accurately, a lot of people have started playing the Enemy Within. And a huge amount of people have played Shadows of Bergenhafen multiple times, and then a lot of them have carried on to play Death in the Reich, and then a significant chunk of them have carried on to Powerbind the Throne, and then it's largely
it keeps tapering off.
And I know for myself, I have played through Shadows of Bergenhafen like 6 or 7 times.
It's a classic of, like, so many tens of thousands of people have started Empire campaigns in Total War. Maybe like a few thousand have finished it.
Quite.
You get to a point where you're like, I'm going to start a new campaign.
So we definitely, when I was fleshing out Bergenhafen like that, like it was a lot of fun, because I had the template been established. Like, while we were writing Ubersreik, we were figuring out what worked as a template, what was the right length, what was what for a bigger location, for a smaller location, for an average location, and how that worked. And we were refining our process. So that was all locked in when I got to doing the work for Bergenhafen for the appendix there. The difference is that town, because it's better known by role players, and so, like, Ubersreik is known very well by people who played Vermintide, but it's a almost slightly post-apocalyptic kind of Ubersreik again. There, it's not the bustling kind of actual normal Empire town that we made. So we had a lot of freedom in terms of what we did there. With Bergenhafen, we had less freedom. And I don't say that's a bad thing. Like, it was good to work within those constraints, but there were certain key locations that were actually integral to the adventure. So you were like, well, okay, I'm not gonna, I can't touch that.
Have these like anchor points to work around. Yeah,
exactly. So then it was a question of going, well, okay, what are the things that haven't been filled in, and what would be fun, and how do I make that not the same as Ubersreik? Like, that, again, that was a conscious goal for me, so that if people wanted to, in my kind of head, if people wanted to, they could potentially take some of those Bergenhafen locations and actually move them into Ubersreik, and vice versa if they wanted to. You might have to take quite a lot of them, because there were those kind of links between them. But I wanted that again.
It can absolutely be done. Yeah.
It was utility. We wanted everything we wrote to be useful. So if someone said, "Well, I'm not actually going to play the Enemy Within. I'm sticking playing in Ubersreik. Oh, but there's a whole bunch of extra. Well, maybe actually, if I've got that book, I can make some use of it." And also, what we wanted, what often happens with adventure books, is GMs buy it, read it, run it once, and then never look at it again, because they've done that adventure. And we thought, well, let's put some material in that book that means it continues to be of value, so somebody doesn't feel, oh, I spent all this money in a book that I've just used for those few adventures, And you know, and I also because I didn't have to do as thorough a job. I didn't have as many pages. I didn't have as much space. I had a little bit more freedom to kind of pursue, particularly for the adventure hooks and what I fleshed out. I had a little bit more freedom in kind of what I kind of chose there. So, like, you know, I did things like I put the Masons Guild in there, but then made ties to the Masons, like in the real world, and the idea of them being part of a secret cult that was nothing to do with the ruinous powers. It was just it was a normal mundane cult. And
nice
that was, exactly, and that was my sort of deliberate choice, was to slightly to play with that. So people go, oh, the Masons have, oh no, but actually the Masons are like the Masons, but actually they're not that bad. They're not, you know, so things like that. But also, it was an opportunity to kind of flesh out and justify things that were necessary for the actual main narrative, right? So, you know, a classic thing of Warhammer is, you know, the basic setup for WFRP is you are a bunch of randoms, and, you know, you might have nobles, you might have wizards and priests like we do in LAWhammer, you might all be like rat catchers and beggars and barge hands and you know, really kind of like, you know, working class, nobody cares about you kind of characters. And then you discover something bad is happening, and the authorities will do nothing about it, and so you have to do something about it. Right? You can't rely on the Watch or the nobles or the cults to fix the problems for whatever reasons. Sometimes because they're evil and corrupted. Sometimes because they just don't trust you because you don't look trustworthy. You know, there's all manner of kind of reasons for that. And it's the same reason why, like, children's authors almost always like kill off the parents, right? Because there has to be a reason why the kids are the ones who have to fix the problem.
Yeah,
right?
You can't just be like, oh, I found this problem, please fix. Yeah,
exactly. They can't have a responsible adult around, because that will take away all the drama from the story. So in the same way, we have to justify that. And like the classic one, this is very minor spoilers for Enemy in Shadows. So if you're going to play it and you haven't played it yet, skip ahead by about a minute, because it's what happened in our stream just last week. But you do, when you go down into the sewers, you do encounter a demon, and you know, the obvious thing within the Warhammer setting is you go talk to the Cult of Sigmar, and you're like, "There's a freaking demon in the sewer. Do something about it."
Yeah.
But if the Cult of Sigmar are like focused and are good and do their job, then that kind of takes away some of the jeopardy and you know, and the kind of, you know,
it's like, oh, okay, we'll send in the witch hunters, y'all can leave.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I was like, oh, great, problem solved. So, but then I was like, but how do I justify them not doing it, but also not throw the Cult of Sigmar under the bus? And so I think what I did there was I ended up with a high priest who is not a blessed priest, is just more of a political operator, and is more interested in just, you know, kind of working, which is not a bad thing, right? Because Sigmarites are all about bringing the empire together and unity and working together. So actually having a politically motivated high priest in a high temple of Sigmar
would be critical. Yeah,
exactly. That's
especially
a good
when you're
thing.
dealing with like Burgermeisters and other guys. Yeah,
exactly. So he actually is doing his job right in terms of that. He is not equipped for dealing with the martial destroying demons side of things. That's just not his area of expertise. And sure, he could write to the Grand Cathedral in Altdorf and somebody will arrive, but by then it's too late. Like, you know, you're dealing with that imminent threat. So it was things like that. It was going, well, how do I make sure that I flesh out the Temple of Sigmar so that it has NPCs you could actually, if you're spending time in Bergenhafen, you as like, you know, like Father Leopold, to take our adventure, like, could go, if we weren't in the imminent, you know, doomsday clock threat of the campaign we were playing through, he could go and spend time in that Temple of Sigmar, and he wouldn't be like, oh my god, they're all heretics, and he'd have to, you know, burn the place or whatever. But by the same token, also, they are of no use to me in my current present situation. And that was what I was sort of trying to write. And lots of the other systems, like I fleshed out situations around like the magistrates, the merchants guilds and things, which are all featured like quite like integral to the plot, but I kind of added in some of the unnamed extra characters.
And I can tell you from personal experience, you did a great job on that. Because like like in my Sunday games, so like the game I'll be playing later today, like I play Sigmar Witch Hunter in those. And like when it was my first time in Bogenhafen. I had never. It's my first playthrough where I think we're getting close to being done with Death on the Reich. I don't know. Death on the Reich is very hard to gauge where you are in that adventure. But like I was trying really hard to get the Sigmarite Church, and it was so well written that the GM was able to do all these really clever things of that. They were actually a powerful tool, but I had to learn how to use them as a political hammer to really threaten and mess with the merchants. But like we, despite the fact like we had like a Goldsberg level scheme that we tried to pull off, and it would have worked if it had been for fucking Gideon. But I hate that guy.
Yeah, I hate that guy so much.
Gideon. So much. But it's like Bogenhofen blew up. Like we failed. Bogenhofen died, and it was brutal. But like I love that. Like it, but and the GM had so many awesome little tools of that. It wasn't just like I'm genuinely not calling out any specific adventures. I've never GM'd a D&D campaign, but I've played in some D&D campaigns that are I don't want to say railroady, but they provide you the very specific materials to. This is the adventure about your characters, not this is a living space where you can run an adventure in.
Yeah.
I think they've gotten a lot better with that with time, but like a lot of the classic book, it was about a dungeon. It's about running a very particular linear experience. Therefore, the book becomes useless after you've done it, which is just not the case with Wolfrup. Like I'm running my own group now through Enemy Within. And like I've played, I think 1 or 2 other times, though those didn't finish doing Enemy in Shadow, and they were completely different experiences. Like a key moment would happen, I'd be like, oh, that's that moment, but it is wildly different because like different characters are doing different things, and like even characters where I'm like, oh, well, guy is obviously this person. No, he wasn't. They did something different.
Well, that's it, and that's obviously the challenge that Andy's got with LAWhammer, because like he's running it through, and like Lindsay and I both, like particularly me, like worked on the Enemy in Shadow book. So but again, like beyond the broad, like I knew we were going to go to Bogenhofen. I knew the Schaffenfest was going to be there. I know there's going to be awful stuff, and Moorsleeve's going to cause problems. Like those broad strokes, I know are coming, but it's a sort of trust thing as well. Like Andy knows I'm not going to derail the adventure by going, oh, I'm going to go to find this particular merchant and kill them before this causes any problem. Like it would be blindingly obvious.
I'm going to go look for a small child in this one guy's house and strangle it.
Yeah, exactly.
Immediately.
And like, and what Andy's also doing is obviously he's changing things as well. And he's changing things partly just to make them different. But he's also then, like, I'm reasonably confident he's been changing things since Father Leopold entered the Augur career. Things have changed a little bit now. And I don't know if you've seen this week's episode.
I haven't seen what y'all filmed this Friday because unfortunately I was busy. I am caught up otherwise. Like I've seen, cool. I have, man, binging Tales in Altdorf. Oh, nice. Like, amazing. Also, just like you're sitting there like, oh yeah, I got time, and you look and you're like, oh, this is gonna be how many hours?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
It worked quite well. I had to travel quite a bit that week, so that was what I listened to in the car. As I listened to everybody else's tales in the car as I was driving around. But there's a thing that happened. You'll see this is not a significant spoiler, but in this most recent episode, there's a point where having left, because we dealt with the demon the previous week,
right?
Having left the sewer, like Father Leopold like still feels the kind of corruption wherever he goes, and so he can't identify what is or isn't unholy. When he enters holy ground, he knows he's on holy ground again, but when he leaves, when he's just in Bogenhofen, it all feels unholy. The whole of Bogenhofen feels unholy to him, but it doesn't to Yume, our blessed cleric of Renald. It's working as normal. Now, whether that's because Renald is a sneaky, tricky god, and therefore whoever it is that's causing this problem is, whether it's because Leopold as an augur is more sensitive to that kind of stuff. It could be either. I don't think we'll ever get a straight answer, and that's just how I like it, because we're dealing with, metaphysical things that are beyond kind of mortal ken. But it added a really interesting wrinkle and then a really interesting dynamic in the kind of inter-party relationships and things. And like that's something that never would have happened. And you will, like, I'm spoiling nothing, but I think you're going to find this week's episode very funny, particularly the ending of it. And then you're going to listen to the ending and go, how did we get there from where we kind of started? Because we don't entirely understand, and we did it. So yeah, I'm saying nothing, but it ended in an unexpected way. So.
Just watching your tales go from, oh, I'm going to go to this meeting to, what, a day later being like, I don't have eyes anymore.
Yeah, that was it. All right, if you'll forgive the pun.
He did not lose them the way you thought he was going to.
Yeah,
I definitely thought he lost them a totally different way.
Yeah. And if you'll forgive the pun, I didn't see that coming either.
Oh my god!
But yeah, sorry, so sorry. But it was interesting because it genuinely came out. Obviously, Andy threw me the dilemma of, right, you can enter Seer or Augur or not. And I was like, yeah, screw it, let's do it. Let's go somewhere different. And that was fine. And it was only after we were talking about like what and I was like, oh, you know, I thought, because he's like, when you take the talent, you lose your sight. And I happened to have a bunch of XP banked, so I could actually take the talent immediately. And I said to him, oh, you know what's funny? Like during the conclave, like I actually thought to myself, that brief moment when Leopold had the revelation that the reason seers were blind is because, you know, the ruinous powers can affect the world and distort your vision and trick you. And so if you can't see the material world, you can see more clearly what's actually going to come sort of through your prophecy, through your augury. I genuinely had this brief mad moment where I thought Leopold's going to pop his eyes out. And I thought, no, that's horrible. That's horrible. That's insane.
I remember there being that moment. I'm like, he's about to scratch his own eyes out, isn't he?
And then
you could feel it in the air.
Yeah, you could see it on my. Lindsay often says this on the inside the Rickers that I have a terrible poker face. So if a funny comment comes up in the chat or whatever, or if an interesting question comes, she says she can tell that I've seen the questions coming and I've started thinking about it because it's really obvious in my face. But I did have that thought, but I suppressed it. But then when Andy and I were chatting, I was like, well, I had this thought and blah blah blah, and he said, well, and we discussed it through. It's the nice thing about playing in a campaign with Andy is he's very collaborative as a GM. So we did have that conversation about what would be the most characterful way for him to do it. We're like, it has to be him. It has to be, you know, Leopold's choice. It can't be something Sigmar does to him. It's something that he chooses. And that very much feels on brand for him. And then the fact that he's from this Order of the Silver Flame, that he's actually from, like, although he himself is from Ubersreik, his order is based in kind of Middenheim, protecting the sacred flame of Ulrich. Like, well, we've got to do something with that, and so it evolved into what happened.
Man, it was it was beautifully done. B, it felt like a cutscene on Dark Souls. Like, this is absolutely something I think I've seen happen in Elden Ring or something. So one thing I wanted to ask you about, kind of going back to there are like two things I really want to ask about. So going back to the cities for a second, for someone that is, and this doesn't even necessarily pertain purely to Wolfrip, but if someone like sees a city on the map, or like they're doing a campaign and they're just like, okay, I'm getting from A to B, but I'm going to pass through these places and I want to make them a little more interesting. What would be kind of your advice to someone that has very little experience, kind of taking something that has, like, I've got a name, I've got a dot on a map, I know vaguely where it is. What is your advice to try and breathe some life into that, to kind of like expand a little bit, make sure when my party gets here, they can have a good time, and it's not just going to be me going, what do you want to do? And they say something, and then you're looking at your bank of names like, oh god, what is going to be does this place have a smith? What's his name going to be? You're just sitting there like, if you're really wanting to try and make the place feel more alive, what is your advice to doing that?
Well, I mean, like part of this, because I think you're right. I think in a lot of adventures, and again, I'm not shitting on D&D or anything, but like a lot of the older D&D stuff, particularly, like it still was quite generic, right, in terms of the setting. So there might be a really interesting story and really interesting, like, villainous NPCs that you were kind of engaging with, but then you would be passing through standard medieval villages with standard medieval taverns everywhere you went in. Everything was kind of interchangeable and kind of the same. And there are exceptions to that, obviously, and as the the lore has deepened, it has got much better. But that's the key thing, is you want to try and avoid that, right? You want to try, like, if you go to different cities in the real world, assuming you stay out of like shopping malls and Starbucks and things like that, if you go to actual cities, like, they're different.
Yes,
right?
Yes, I've arrived in a new country. I will now go to all the places I already know.
Yeah, exactly. Like, if you come, I don't know if you've ever been to Edinburgh, for instance.
I have.
Yeah,
beautiful
right?
city.
So it's something, but it's really odd, right? Like,
yes.
it's got right in the middle. It's got a giant rock with a castle on top of it that you can see from almost anywhere.
It literally looks like someone came on a ruin, was like, instead of like knocking, we're just gonna build on top of it.
Yeah.
And it'll be fine. Like,
then,
we're just going to put glass on top. It'll be great.
Slightly further over, you've got like a big extinct volcano called Arthur's Seat, this big giant hill just rearing out of the city that's even taller. You've got this large park called the Meadows, which is what used to be a lake that then got drained and now is this kind of big, massive park right in the city. You've got the Old Town, which I love, but I remember I moved to Edinburgh when I was 17, and the amount of times I would get lost in the Old Town because streets go under and over and around, and you'd be down there and you'd be going, I want to be up there, but I don't know how to get up there. Yeah, walking round and round in circles. Yeah.
It is legit the most fantasy feeling city I've ever been in on my travels, of just like, I was underground and then above ground, and then I'd be on a bridge and I'd be like, wait, that's still exposed to the open air. How the fuck do I get away the hell down there? Yeah, like, where am I going?
I could see it. If I could teleport, I'd be fine.
Google Maps is very interesting in Edinburgh, by the way.
Oh, God, yeah. Oh, yeah. No help at all. But then you go like 50 miles west, you go to Glasgow, right, which is, a bigger city than Edinburgh, for all that Edinburgh's the capital. You go to Glasgow, totally different style of architecture, totally different layout, much more grid-based. In the centre, obviously, you go out to the suburbs and whatever, it's all kind of different. Or you go to Aberdeen, or you go to London, or Manchester, or Birmingham, or all these cities. Like, and the same, obviously, true in America. I've not been to that many cities, but even just like when I went over and worked briefly in America in the late 90s, and I was mostly in the sort of eastern seaboard. So like, New York and like Philadelphia, like, they're not that far away from each other, and yet they're very different. You walk around Philly, you walk around New York, you know which of those cities you're in, right? They're very different. So that's the kind of philosophy to take when you're making a fantasy city, is it should feel different. And then you're like, well, why does it feel different? Well, it might feel different because of the climate. It might feel different because of the architecture. It might feel different because of the culture. And trying to kind of establish that, thinking through the history of that town. How did it begin? Was it a fishing village and it's grown and grown and grown? Is it on a crossroads because it's trading port? In which case, well, it'll be very cosmopolitan. There'll be lots of people from different cultures kind of coming in. Is it like a fortress town? Is it somewhere quite remote, quite different? Is it, those types of things give you the general flavor of the architecture. Like if you look at the Bergenhafen book and the Ubersreik book as well, like the sections there that are like arriving in Ubersreik, and it talks about how you get there, what the countryside is like, what you see when you first kind of arrive. Like have that picture clear in your head, that zoomed out view of what's this city a little bit like. And then start fleshing it out. If you jump into fleshing out the locations without having established like the character of that city, it's going to potentially either end up feeling generic, or it's going to end up feeling disconnected, like a random bunch of locations that you've thrown together. And that's not the worst thing in the world, right? I'm not gonna shit on any particular towns, but there are definitely towns I visited that felt like that. They felt random. I'm like, why is that next to that? Those two things don't belong.
I could take you on a lovely tour through the Panhandle of Texas, where you're like, why do people still live here? Why did they choose to live here in the first place? There's like 50 of them.
And sometimes those can actually be fun to write deliberately, like a town that should have died and hasn't. And you're like, oh, well, that's interesting. Why are people still living there? And what, it's good. And I will give a little shout out here to over on our kind of LAWhammer streams. Andy's been doing a series of videos on a town called Callaghan that he's sort of been mapping.
Yeah.
Awesome
streams.
What he's doing is it's like a little lore dump as well, but he's having these conversations, and the kind of patrons and people who are kind of in the streams and talking to him are kind of giving him inspiration, giving him ideas, and then he's saying, and they're kind of talking about the history of the town in order to justify how it's become the town that it's kind of become, and you kind of obviously, unless you are a particularly devoted GM, you're not going to have. I think he spent like 30 hours on it or something. It seems maybe more than that so far.
Yeah, don't do that to yourself.
Yeah, you don't need to spend that level of obsessive detail that Andy has, because he is a perfectionist.
And he's got problems. Yeah.
yeah, definitely. But that's my big advice: is get the big picture character, get the flavor. What type of town is it? Then zoom in again. What are the main districts and neighborhoods within it? And those can all be kind of different. And steal. That's the other thing I would say. Be a magpie. Steal from the real life, right? So in my brain's gone blank. Ubersreik. In Ubersreik, the posh section is called Morgenseite. right? Which means Morningside. And in Edinburgh, there is a posh district called Morningside. And I literally was like, we will call it Morningside, and I will base it on Morningside. And it's a very kind of like middle class, very, you know.
Well, yeah, use what you know is a really strong system.
Yeah.
Like it even.
And you can steal it from, like, obviously I stole a lot from Edinburgh, but you can steal from, like, you know, like London is a great place to steal from because there's so much history there as well. So you're not just stealing from the character of the district as it is now. You look back through what it was in the past, and you can, like, oh, I can steal that. But anywhere you visited, anywhere you live, anywhere you've read about that seems interesting, just magpie it. Just say, I'll have that, and then spin it so that it fits inside your fantasy world. That's my main advice.
Awesome. And then the second thing I really wanted to ask, because I can tell you, like, you've done a lot of it and oozing with passion for it, is that when someone is going to play Wolfrup and like they're making their first character, or like they're kind of interacting with the world, what would you kind of say for those people is kind of the secret sauce or the recipe for making a enjoyable to play character to interact with the Warhammer world? Like, of like a lot of people for D&D, it tends to, you know, it's very like class specific a lot of the time, of like, what kind of powers do you want to have? And because D&D, you know, all the classes are very bombastic in a lot of ways when it comes to combat scenarios. You know, Wolfrup doesn't really have that. Like, there are classes like that of like, oh, you want to throw spells? Okay. You know, or you want to be like able to shout about a god and things happen, you know, but those are kind of exceptions to the rule. What would kind of be your advice if someone is pretty unfamiliar with roleplay or in like kind of the Warhammer world to really be able to bring something to life that's uniquely them?
Cool. So, like, it really is like Warhammer is much more of a game in which characters like live in that world, if it makes sense. So, like, the careers that are there, some of them, you know, map quite nicely onto your classes from D&D, right? So you can be a wizard, you can be a blessed priest who can do miracles and things. You can be a fighter, you can be a knight, you can be those types of things. But also, you can be a clerk, you can be a rat catcher, you can be a beggar, you can be a villager, right? All those sort of generic careers are in there, and they all have like 4 tiers. So you can become like a village elder if you really wanted to. Now, that career probably isn't in there for PCs to aspire to. Maybe it is. You might be running a particularly odd campaign and that you're all living in the same village for like 40 years.
Well,
you could do that
if you do an Ubersreik campaign, open a shop could be a really important thing. Yeah.
But realistically, those are more often there for fleshing out the NPCs and the world that you're living in. But the fact is that you would know those people. Like, your character isn't just a random murder hobo who's, you know, spawned in the world in order to kill monsters and collect gold, right? They were a person who had a life before this story began. And so thinking about what that is. And what was really interesting was for the LAWhammer stream, like, this is the first time in a long time that I haven't done random character gen. Like, we've randomly rolled our stats and our starting talents and stuff like that, and our you know, heights, which is why Leopold is so ridiculously tall. But everybody forgets Leopold is so ridiculously tall because he is also there with an elf and someone who's even taller, because Birdie's 1 inch taller than him as well. Like, so that was different. Like, we knew, Andy knew he wanted to have like a Blessed Priest of Sigmar. He knew he wanted to have a Bright Wizard. He knew he wanted to have, you know, and so we all, once the players were all sorted, we all discussed which ones we most wanted to play. And I was like, I'll play anything. So I took who was left, which is Leopold, and I'm very delighted with that because I'm having a lot of fun with him. But normally, I would say embrace the random character gen that is in the kind of Wolfrup core book. But it is possible to roll something that you hate, right? So embrace it, but with options. Like, what we've done quite often. In
just be warned, it is addicting. It's like making a new character in like any game. Totally. Like, I've wasted way too many hours just creating characters I will never play, but it's just fun.
It's hands down my favorite thing. I once, when I was a kid, had the Champions role-playing system, which is like a superhero system, and I literally never played it, but I spent like hundreds of hours. I made up like 150 characters, just every, because I was a kid. I was superheroes. I was like, what superpower can I think of? And then I'll make them as a character. But with this, like embrace the random. But equally, you know, if you roll, you know, I would often say make up more than one random character and then work out which one you think's most interesting. But what I hugely recommend is doing that with the rest of the party, and don't immediately go, I rolled that, I don't like that, I'm going to start again. but rather roll it and then talk to each other about it. Like there's a character, and we never ended up actually playing it. But Lindsay Law and I rolled up a pair of characters that we ended up deciding that they were going to be half siblings. And like I'd rolled like a duelist, like a fencer, and I can't remember if she'd rolled like if it was a wizard or if it was a herbalist or something, somebody who had some healing skills anyway. And we basically came up with this backstory that they'd been part of a traveling carnival, and that that's where they were, and it just because our random talents also kind of fed into those kind of things, and we built up this really interesting backstory for these sort of two characters that. It would have been very easy to. Oh, I've rolled a fencer, so right, it's Inigo Montoya from The Princess Bride, but I'll file the serial numbers off and play something generic. But instead, it was somebody who does sword tricks for money. Like that's what they do, and that's a very different way of playing that type of character. So,
I think that's a really. I wish I had done that with my party now, because like rolling them individually, it tends to be much more of a how do I imagine myself justified playing this character. As opposed to how are these guys going to work together. That also saves you the convenience of how the hell do you know each other, which is often like one of the most annoying things for new players and a new GM. Like nobody, everybody meets in a tavern is poor horse. That thing is dead. It's so dead.
Oh yeah. That's been flogged. That's not even bone anymore. That's just dust now. I recently started running. I mentioned before, I'm a teacher, running a game of Warhammer for some of the students in my school. I teach at an all girls high school here in Edinburgh, and it was great because they approached me about running something role playing because they saw me. I was wearing like a nerdy like D&D themed t-shirt. And they're like, "Oh, do you do?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And they're like, "Oh, we do." And I was, but it's really hard to play. I was like, "I'll run something for you." So I decided to run them through the starter set with it because I knew it so well. I knew Ubersreik, so I was like, "We'll just do that." But I did exactly that. I got them all to roll, and then we all discussed together how I didn't want them all to know each other, but I wanted everybody to know at least one other person. So we ended up with. I had an outlaw who had randomly rolled noble blood as a random talent.
Ooh, that's good.
I'm like, right. And I was like, right. So I was like, you've got options here. Are they a bastard? Are they on the run? And then, her friend who was in the group randomly rolled up a soldier. And so we came up with this elaborate backstory that she was a noble, but she didn't get on with her father. And I think we actually made it so the character was non-binary, and that might have been part of the tension with the father in terms of having an heir. And so they had kind of like fled from their father's home, and the soldier had been their childhood best friend, having grown up in the castle, was sent out to bring them back with the party, but then just found them, deserted, and ran off with them, and was sort of kind of protecting them. And then I had a hedge witch and a witch hunter who were twin siblings because they rolled.
Ooh, okay, that's fun.
They randomly rolled the same height, eye color, hair color, and I can't remember what it was, but there was one of the random talents that they both rolled the same one as well. And we're like,
the dice gods decided,
the dice are saying you guys are twins. So we came up with a whole thing with she was a hedge witch who was going to be sent to kind of infiltrate the Grey College, and the witch hunter knew about the hedge witches and was being sent to infiltrate the witch hunters in order to protect the hedge witch network as well. So we were, again, and that's a payoff that's never going to happen because I'm actually moving to a new school after the summer, so someone else is going to have to follow that seed, but we set that there so that there's a potential long-term party tension. So they knew each other, and then two other characters knew each other, and then I had another group of 3 that were on the run from Altdorf, and then I threw them all together in Night of Blood so that they kind of bonded as a party. That way.
I don't know how I've never thought of that. That's such an awesome way to do that, because like all of my favorite characters I've ever made have been me collaborating with my GM, but it helps when you know a lot about the universe and can be like, oh, I know what framework I'm going to work in. But yeah, working with someone else, that provides so many strengths, especially that works really well.
Particularly for a new group, because particularly for me, I was like, a handful of them had played D&D before, but half of them had literally never played role-playing games. They'd watched Stranger Things, and they wanted to, but they didn't really know it. And I knew that they would find putting on a character's voice and talking in character a bit weird at first.
Yeah.
And I thought, how do I make that easier for them? Well, if they're doing it to their friend, then that's fine. And if they all crack up and giggle a little bit, that's okay. It doesn't matter, because it gets them more comfortable with kind of what they're doing in the role playing. So
yeah. The kind of talking about chatting with other players zinged me. There was one thing I really wanted to ask you about in particular, because it's something that I think a lot of people like the idea of but really struggle with. and it's something that like I learned with time, and I think most people learn it with time, but it's a scary skill, which is combative scenarios. So like one of the best things about watching LAWhammer is Father Loophole, especially, is that Father Loophole is, you know, he's so doggedly determined in his faith and set in it that he naturally has conflicts with other characters, because when you have a character who's very set in their ways, they're gonna conflict with fellow PCs. So you have all these like really awesome arguments between him and Alamenowith, where they're constantly clashing about certain concepts and ideas. What would you say is kind of like the player advice or player Bible when it comes to having kind of those player versus player interactions without it becoming uncomfortable, or without it being like, well, we're gonna start rolling dice and like swinging at each other and stuff? Like, what would you say is kind of like your method or your thought process when you're in those kind of scenarios where you have a character who's like, no, my character would like take issue with this, but keeping it where it's like it's still a fun experience?
Yeah, well, I think there's two sides to it in terms of keeping it right. So the first side is the interpersonal side, like within the actual people, the players, right? So like Lindsay and I are really good mates, right? Like we've known each other since like I was 18, she was 17, right? We've known each other for like more than half of our lives. So we know that if our characters are arguing, we are not arguing. It's our characters that are arguing. So we're okay with that. If you've got a brand new group with new players who maybe don't know each other that well, like don't immediately have them at each other's throats. Let them get to know each other. Have a bit of a laugh with them. Make sure that nobody's going to take offense at it. It's the sort of out of character risk. The in character risk is that you derail the story through stubbornness, right? Like you have to acknowledge that you are all there to tell a collaborative story. And, you know, we're really trying in LAWhammer to get that point of, you know, we will all take turns to kind of metaphorically step up and then step back from the spotlight. And, you know, you should absolutely stay true to your character, but if you stay true to your character to such a point that it derails the campaign and stops the story and stops everyone else's fun, then that was the wrong sort of decision. And there have been times when, you know, there have been points where Leopold has wanted to kind of carry on making a point, but I've sensed from Andy that it's time to move on. And I'm like, well, I'm just going to keep prolonging this argument for the sake of prolonging this argument.
Yeah.
Leopold, you know, we essentially you're almost kind of like, you know, fading away to the sounds of them bickering in the background and assuming that argument carried on and nothing was resolved. So that's a key thing. And there have been examples where, and I'm sure I've done it, but I definitely am aware of some of my, you know, friends when we were younger in our campaigns who've done exactly, been like, well, my character, you know, wouldn't go into that dungeon because blah blah blah, and we're like, the adventure hook is literally telling us to go down. You know, like come on.
That's where the camera's going. So
exactly that's really. I wish we'd used that metaphor. I said, okay, well, you can stay here and you can literally go and sit in the kitchen on your own for 4 hours while the rest of us go down to that dungeon and have some fun. And then I'm pretty confident they would have changed their mind at that point. But the key thing is that, you know, we also talk about it out of character as well, and we're not, and that's something different that we're doing for LAWhammer, and we're not scripting them or anything. But like, so to take for example the ones you mentioned, like Leopold and Alamenowith, like they are like deeply allied together. Like they like Leopold knows that Alamenowith is the key to them potentially averting the apocalypse. He knows that without her, all is lost. So he knows that, right? And she, you know. And she like absolutely values him, probably not to quite the same extent, but does value him as well. But they do have very different perspectives on the world. They do have very different agendas on the world. She doesn't understand his faith, because how his faith manifests is not how it works with elves. She doesn't understand that, but she, as an elf, isn't necessarily, I'm putting words into her mouth here, but I don't believe is comfortable admitting to ignorance, except in certain situations where she's absolutely comfortable admitting to ignorance. And so a lot of attention has come from that. A lot of attention has come from, like, Lindsay does a very good job of thinking and communicating as Alamenowith very differently from as Lindsay, so that there is a very fixed mindset that Alamenowith is looking at things through, you know, that kind of lens, and Leopold is looking at things through that kind of lens. And there is some overlap there, but there is also a lot of real difference. And we did realize that after the most intense argument that we had like 2 or 3 weeks ago, afterwards, we then realized that we actually were genuinely trying to agree with each other. But I was expressing it through Leopold's way his paradigm. She was expressing it through Elemental's paradigm, and it sounded like we were totally disagreeing. So we were arguing, and they were like, "We're actually trying to say the same thing." And at some point, I think either on a stream, we're either going to do a flashback of that conversation or something. We've got plans at some point when it's not as narratively pacey that we're pushing through to flesh out how Leopold and Elemental kind of reach
Death
that.
on the Reich. Death on the Reich, because Bogenhoff is busy.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
It's a ticking time bomb. That's awesome. That's a lot of great advice. So I've just kind of been watching the chat casually as we've been kind of chatting and stuff, and a couple of questions come up that I do think would be interesting to kind of hear your thoughts on. So one person asked of when it comes to like playing Imperial Halflings, like playing a Halfling that's been born and raised in the Empire, never been to the Moot, has a lot of human interactions. Would you have any advice for playing a Halfling who kind of has like genuine relationship with like the Empire gods versus like a more typical Halfling? Like they actually are a Sigmarite, or they've been kind of raised within those communities where they don't have Esmeralda or the regular Halfling gods. What would that kind of look like if you were giving advice for them?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's interesting, because I think you still, I guess the question is where they came from, because if they're part of the Halfling clans of the Reichland, even though they're not in the Moot and haven't been to the Mootland, they're still, if they're a Havertown or if they're a Thorncobble, they're a Thorncobble. They've lived with Thorncobbles. That's what their life has been. So the obvious thing to do would be to be like a Lost Pockets. So to be essentially an orphan Halfling, Halfling who doesn't have a clan, who maybe then has been let in. Like there is an NPC that we did that was a basic. Was it in Ubersreik or was it Bergen? I genuinely can't remember. It's all blurred together now. But there was an NPC who was like a Halfling orphan, who basically was sort of raised in a human orphanage along with humans, and then they all grew old and died, and he's still like like 50, 60 years old. He's a beggar. I think it's one of the. I think it might be one of the ones I did for the archives article actually. And like essentially, it's this slightly tragic figure who had that the classic story you get in vampire novels and things about
very old thing with a lot of things that die. Mayfly,
exactly. So you kind of have that, but with that I was very much focused on them being like a beggar or a thief on the streets of Altdorf, like being that kind of kind of character. So it wasn't particularly religious. I mean, I think that the whole question of religion in Warhammer is interesting, right? Because and in case I'm going to put a little disclaimer on now, I intend no offense to anybody, so if I accidentally say something offensive, I do apologize. In the real world, I am a committed atheist, right? Just to make that clear. But the difference between like the faiths in Warhammer and the real world, like beyond the fact that it's polytheistic kind of pantheon that you have there is tangible proof that these gods not only exist and are real, but that they manifest things on the mortal plane.
If someone in our world
if
someone in our world called out to God and made a hammer burst into flame, I'd be a lot more convinced.
Yeah, exactly, right? Exactly. So what faith means in that world is very different from what faith means in our world, right? It's not, does Sigmar exist or not? Although there is the Sigmarian heresy, and is he a god or is he not a god? And that's that will definitely come into play later on in the Enemy Within campaign. So there is that. But the reality is that everyone accepts the existence of the gods. It then comes down to how much respect do you pay them? Like that's what it's about. And for most people in a polytheistic society, you appeal to the relevant god at the relevant time. Right, so if somebody has died, you make an offering to Mor to look after them and sort of shepherd their soul.
Even though you probably a lot of people don't like to think about Mor outside of that.
Exactly,
death, scary.
Exactly, it's considered ill-omen to kind of mention his name, because if you're not a priest, because you might draw his eye on you, and that might mean that you die. So so you do your best to do it, but at the right time, you're like, well, now is the time to respect that god. And what we really try to do in fourth edition was add in the fact that there are lots of like little gods as well, like Bogenar and Grandfather Reich and all these other gods.
Every sizable tree, river, stream, lake, mountain that probably got some kind of thing going on.
Yeah. And something that people may or may not have picked up actually from Leopold's backstory, when he talked about why he got kicked out of Sal, which eventually he was opposed in the
Mm.
yeah. And like, you know, the thing was just sort of briefly mentioned, but it was a blessed priestess of Dirath that he was with. So that shows that even these smaller gods are also real and also manifest these kind of miracles. Now, what that means metaphysically, it is open to. I don't know what Andy is.
Oh yeah,
going
that would open. Yeah, that's when you get into the really fun.
Exactly. I know what blessed priests were in the cosmology of Andy's old Warhammer world that we saw through to the end until it blew up, but I suspect it's different in this world. But yeah. So were you to have a halfling then, to go back to the question, a halfling, so you know, I think certainly I think a halfling would, like in the Empire, even if they were part of like the, you know, one of the clans that was established there and spent most of their time with halflings, they would probably very quickly understand, if they were a halfling who cared about the social niceties of the Empire, they would learn to pay respects to the appropriate gods at the appropriate time. They might not believe, it might not matter to them, but they would do it out of that.
I want to say there's a note in either the archives or the core book for halflings where it's like halflings have kind of that better safe than sorry philosophy of like, I may not believe in this god, but I'm not going to risk pissing him off. Like, I'll just whatever, cool.
Or risk pissing off the people who do believe in this god as well, you know. And it also, and again, it's not a question of they go, well, does Ulrich exist or not? Like, they know Ulrich exists. They can see blessed priest. They can see divine symbols. They can see a bloody white fire burning in the temple in midnight.
Yeah, is it relevant to what I'm doing right now? Yeah.
I mean, exactly. Is he a god who pays any attention to me? Do I, you know, like an Ulrich with halflings? Like, probably not, because they're not legendary warriors, right? Yeah. But were they about to go into battle, and were some humans making a prayer to Ulrich and, like, you know, splashing beer over their weapons or whatever as an offering? Would a halfling warrior do the same? Yeah, probably. To kind of to blend in as much to appease the god as to appease the humans who believe in the god and worship the god, if that makes sense. Now, if you were to go one step further and have, you know, suggest that, you know, had a halfling who actually, like, believed so much in a god that they felt the calling to actually enter the cult of that god. I mean, absolutely, you could do that. That thing would be really interesting. Obviously, you know, by the core rules as written, halflings aren't allowed in those careers, I don't think, because, you know, halflings aren't allowed to get the, you know, blessing talents that let them kind of do those kind of things, because their relationships with the cosmology is fundamentally different because of their physiology. But you know, most priests in the cults are not blessed. Most of them don't take those talents; they take the other talents and kind of go through. Most player characters do, because it's fun. Why wouldn't you want your hammer to burst into fire? Yeah. But within the cult, they're a minority. I mean, even when Leopold went to the conclave and saw that there were hundreds of blessed priests, which was far more than he was expecting, he was still only hundreds out of a cult that numbers in the tens of thousands, if not more, right? So it still is a tiny percentage of that cult that are blessed. So unless you're messing with the cosmology, which, hey, it's your hammer, and if you want to, you absolutely can.
There's exceptions to every rule.
Yeah. But the halflings almost certainly wouldn't be manifesting miracles and blessings, but they could absolutely enter it. And again, the key, whoever it was who asked this question, like, good question. The key to is this an interesting idea? Is right now I'm thinking, oh God, like a halfling priest of a human god would be quite an interesting character to play. Somebody who has, you would have to come up with the backstory as to why they chose to dedicate themselves to that one god in particular. Like, if it was Sigmar, like, were they orphaned and raised by humans who were devout Sigmarites, and they got it from, you know, and this is almost like a penance or a payback for the fact that somebody took them in and cared for them, that they're now honoring their wishes by kind of like perpetuating the cult that they supported, something like that. Or is it, you know, like if it was, say, Shalia, you know, are they someone who is gifted at healing and is good at that type of thing, but for some reason, but they're not particularly motivated by money, because, you know, that's the funny thing about halflings, that they're excellent thieves, but they don't actually mostly care about the acquisition of wealth. So they're not going to train to become a physician, or maybe they weren't allowed to go to university to train to be a physician.
Right? Yeah. Like,
so the entry the cult of Shalia.
Halfling in here with all these expensive instruments? I don't think so.
Yeah.
It's like...
Whereas if you had a good-hearted halfling who wanted to help people, you could see them entering the cult of Shalia. So I think it definitely could be interesting, and it is the exception, not the norm. But that doesn't mean it's not an interesting character. In fact, the opposite of it, it's very interesting.
I mean, the player characters 9 times out of 10 tend to fall into that Exception, not the norm group.
Yeah.
You know, it's like most people find a demon in the sewers and they're like, I'm out. We're done here.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, half of our player characters wanted to do that as well.
Oh my god! I was sitting there like, they're just gonna leave this thing down here? They got a bright wizard. Do your job.
Yeah. I mean, to be fair, Elric didn't want to leave, and Leopold didn't want to leave. But yeah,
Leopold was having a bad time.
Oh, my dice!
The dice were so bad.
Oh my god! I rolled so many fumbles, and then would re-roll, and it'd be like 90 something. You're like, oh my god! And he got there eventually. But like, you know, Leopold's like the core things he's good at, like core, so like cool, prey, melee basic. Like he's pretty good at those. Like his skills are 60s. His prey is like 79. It's insane. Yeah.
When
84, 89.
There's one thing Blood Bowl has taught me: if Nuffle decides you're screwed, you're screwed. Like there's doesn't matter how good you are, there's no getting around it.
But it built. It's a good example of how random dice mechanics can build narratives. In that, you know, like, you know, blessings weren't working and his things weren't working, and he tried to back off of the unholy ground, but he couldn't. He felt like he couldn't back away from it. And eventually he's like, well, I have to just try again. And so he centered himself and tried again. And that time he passed, flame and the hammer. Right, time to go back, you know. So it built that up. And that is the kind of thing that happens to us more often than not. I remember we played through the Ashes of Middenheim adventure in second edition.
Yeah.
And there's sort of a climatic fight, and my character, because second edition, if you play it rules as written, is brutal. First my character is absolutely brutal.
I've had some unfortunate experiences as a GM of like introducing someone to the game and was like, we're playing raw, just because I wasn't old enough yet to really understand that you should probably fudge it. I literally had an opening scene of like they're defending a small town from some beastmen raiders. Not a lot of beastmen. One of the Ungor archers just goes pew and just nails a guy, crits again. he just dies. He just gets shot through the throat with an arrow, and you're just like,
that's it.
Yikes.
Well, I had so Ashes of Middenheim was like the first in like a 3-volume campaign, and in the climax of that first one in Middenheim, we were fighting against some corrupt priest. My character by that point had already lost all of their fate points, and then right at the end, my character rolled a crit and basically lost his left arm, and was bleeding out, but wasn't dead yet, so could keep fighting until he died. So I carried on fighting, and in the next round, I rolled a crit on the guy we were attacking and cut his arm off. He died instantly. I then failed my blood loss roll at the end of that round and died at the same time.
Beautiful.
And you're like, and that was all done randomly. That was all random rolls, but it gave us that narrative balance that was just, you know.
Yeah. Well, and that kind of stuff, especially if your character survives, can make for such good like storytelling. Like going back to my experience with my witch hunter, the whole Gideon incident of if like he was literally we did a whole big scheme. He got involved in the scheme because we didn't realize that he was aware of it in a player. Because I never played it, I didn't realize Gideon was a thing. And so when suddenly someone turns into what Gideon turns into, it was like, oh, this is a thing that's happening. And we couldn't chase him down. Like we were using the pursuit rules, and we just rolled like ass on the pursuit, and he was rolling really good, and like tried shooting him, and he kept making his stupid fucking ward save, like he just wouldn't go down. And that ended up leading to Bogenhofen being destroyed. Played immediately into that. And I decided to run with that of like my character, like I went into Flagellant for a little bit after Witch Hunter because my character had such like a crisis of seeing freaking Kairos Fate Weaver destroy a city. And then I went into Runner because my character became obsessed with this idea of I can never be that slow again. Like I can never allow an opportunity where speed was the deciding factor between like victory and defeat. So I went from being a movement 4 character to being a movement 6 character.
Nice.
Never again.
But that is what is so nice about the career system that underpins with
it's such a good system.
It's that it's how you interact with the world, it's how the world interacts with you, and you can make those changes based on on what happens through the story. The obvious example being, Birdie entering the Bargee career because we were spending some time on a barge. Leopold entering the Augur career because he had an opportunity to literally get divine visions from Sigmar. Those things that represent a profound change in what your character's doing and how they're going. And,
I would say the career system is easily the best feature of Wolfrup, like flat out, of just like your character can adjust as the narrative does, or just as experience does. Like you could start the same. You could play a career starting as a sewer jack 100 times and still end up with a wildly different character after not that many sessions, because you're just gonna like, depending on your party comp and what's happening to you, you're gonna end up at different things. Like I've got my witch hunter I went from like basic witch hunter to I think I went flagellant, then runner, then I went back to witch hunter to like level up a tier because I finally got the trappings I needed, and now I'm going into physician because like because when we crafted a little charter for our boat on Death on the Reich, and my witch hunter ironically was the party was the doctor for the boat because he had the heal skill because he had it for torturing people, but like he's like,
that's what I was going to say.
He knows bodies.
Exactly. If you've learned how to open them up and take them apart, it's not a huge leap to learn how to put them back together again. So
but it's like oh well, now I'm kind of leaning more into that of like there's more situations where like our captain, who's a very big warrior Ulrican, keeps I cannot tell you, it's been at least 3 times he has gotten critically injured, and he always rolls pulled muscle for the same arm. Like every time. So every time it's about to heal, he ends up adding like another 17 days. And it's like, Jesus Christ. Like,
but that kind of makes sense, right? It's like a niggling injury in Blood Bowl, right? Like it's the same old wound that keeps,
so you just have this angry witch hunter in every, who now has gone into position because he's like, you gotta stop doing this. Keep the cast on. I don't care what we're fighting.
Oh, I love it.
But it's like those make for such good, being able to lean into those storytelling elements is such a unique thing, because like I don't know of any other system where you can do that. At least not off the top of my head.
No, I mean there's others that have got elements of that. But it's so, because social class and social status is so tied into the Warhammer world, and also because it is much more of a living, breathing world because it's benefiting from 30, 40 years worth of lore and backstory.
I had to break it to you. It's close. It's more 40 now.
yeah.
You can't say 30 anymore.
I mean, no, my God, no, you're right.
Yeah,
that was 86, wasn't it? Oh God.
Yeah, I think Warhammer started in 1985. 1984.
Yeah. Oh, dearie me. Oh, thanks for that.
So, hey, it's like I feel bad when people are, I love talking with people that have been playing it their whole lives, and I'm like, yeah, like I started with 6th edition. They're like, oh really, like 6th? It's like, yeah, well, I was 9 years old, so it's like, ooh, yikes. But hey, it's part of the strength of the medium. It's been around for so much, and it's like it's just been constantly added to.
Exactly, and for all that does cause continuity headaches, as has been discussed at length before about different editions and contradiction.
Keeps me employed.
And stuff like that. Exactly. But also, like, all of that stuff, like, it's all good grist for storytelling, right? It's all rich depth in that world, which does mean that you can have characters. To go back to the question you asked a long time ago about bringing characters to life, like you can do that. Like when you look at the description in the core book of the main sort of like towns and cities in the kind of Reichland, like they've all got different character. And some of that was stuff that we injected, but some of that was stuff that existed already, and like we didn't. So it's a weird, writing setting stuff for Wolfrup is like a weird combination of
y'all did
archaeology and creativity.
I was so thrilled that y'all put in, which I imagine was a fuck ton of a pain in the ass and effort of not just being like, okay, we're gonna release like a modern system for an old campaign. Of no, we're gonna take all these different versions of Warhammer and create one cohesive thing. Like, because I will always fully admit, like when Wolfrup started 4th edition, I was not a fan of it. Like I got the core book and I was like, I don't recognize this empire. Like, this is the empire I grew up with. This is there's all these weird provinces. I don't know these elector counts. And I was like, yep, not interested. Like, just not interested. But then, like, the Enemy Within started coming out, and every once in a while, people would reach out to me and be like, man, have you read, like, this new, like, story thread about how, like, all this stuff's happening? And once I finally put it together in my head that it was like, no, it's a moving narrative, and it's going to the empire I know and love. It was like, holy shit. And then I spent an ungodly amount of money. So
yeah, that's fair.
I wish I had been buying them as they were coming out. It would have been great.
Yeah. I mean, that was very much Andy's grand evil master plan of taking it from including the stuff that you'd recognize from first edition, including the stuff that people recognize from the tabletop game, and bridging those to and sometimes it is a question of perspective, like, and they don't contradict each other, they're just a different focus, but sometimes there are contradictions, but the narrative is built in so that you can change them if you want to. The nature of the Enemy Within campaign, and again, I don't know how Andy's going to end it, but I know that as written, there are multiple potential endings depending on what your players do, what you do and do successfully, but also decisions that you make can kind of influence that. So
yeah, well, and it kind of leans back into that, like, there's so much player agency, wildly, which, and especially when it comes to, like, creating characters too, is like, because you have that 40 years of background, there literally is an exception to every rule, because, like, there's stuff that, like, kind of has functionally been retconned because it doesn't necessarily make sense. But that doesn't mean it didn't happen. It just means maybe it happened in a different way, and you can explore that. It's like, is there a halfling of Sigmar?
Yeah.
Probably not. But does that mean there can't be one? No.
I mean, when you exist in a world where cosmologically, one of the great threats is a chaos god Tzeentch that can literally change reality.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah,
like it's like having the Scarlet Witch, right? In Marvel, like they're all the time. You can literally bump, change it. It's that now, and you're like, oh, okay. And obviously, you don't want to overuse that, but it is there as a way that you can reconcile anything in Warhammer.
Yeah. So someone asked so does that mean if you play through the Enemy Within, all of the books affect the ending, or only the last book? No, they all affect it, because if you're playing consistently through the story, like if characters die or if things happen, that's going to have a dramatic impact on what happens at the end.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, again, I can't speak too much because I don't know. I was involved in Enemy in Shadows and the beginnings of Death on the Reich, and then so I know what was there in the older versions, and I know what we had planned, and we will see what happens when Andy plays it through. So I deliberately haven't read. And every
GM's going to do it different. Yeah. Every GM's going to do it different.
I deliberately haven't read the updated versions of Death on the Reich and Power Behind the Throne, just in case Andy does take influence from any of the Grognard boxes or anything. I was like, I don't need to read those, so I won't. That way, it's slightly easier for him to surprise me. So
yeah. I see another question from chat that kind of was similar to the halfling question of playing between Empire Dwarf and Mountain Dwarf. I will say, if you want, like, a lot of specifics on that, Archives of the Empire Volume 1, awesome for that. Literally has a chapter for Imperial Dwarves and a chapter for Grey Mountain Dwarfs. So we're still waiting on, like, a proper Karazhan supplement one day, maybe. But
I have a thing on dwarfs, actually. So it was interesting because obviously you spoke to Lindsay a lot about dwarfs, and she spoke about the idea of them being matriarchal and sort of justifying their sort of clan structure based on her. Like, we all draw on what we know, right? So Lindsay obviously did a psychology degree, so she draws on all of her kind of experience from that. I did English literature. I did, like, books. That's what I do. And like, I had never really wanted to play a dwarf until, like, maybe a couple of years ago, and now I really, really, really want to play a dwarf because I read a novel called Birdsong by Sebastian Faulks, which is about the First World War, and it features some of the characters in it are sappers, so people who dig under the trenches to try and undermine trenches. So vast swathes of this are written kind of like underground in these confined spaces, and it's incredibly well written to the point of I like almost had a panic attack reading it at one point because it described the claustrophobia of being trapped underground so well. Like, not in a, like, it wasn't full up, but it was like I could feel my heart going and my breathing restricting, and of course I didn't stop. I was like, I'm going to press on. This is incredible. It was like a real visceral reaction, and like that gave me some insight into what it would be like to kind of live underground and how everybody had to kind of work together. And then that then sparked a little synapse connection in my brain with the Expanse. I don't know if you've read or seen the Expanse, the sci-fi.
I'm vaguely familiar with it, because it was pretty is quite a popular show.
Yeah. The show's finished. They sort of finished the show after like what the events have happened in the 6th book, although there are 3 more books that kind of went on. But there's a moment in there, and I honestly can't remember if it's in the show, but I know it's in the novels, where again, one of the groups of humans that you've got living in the solar system are the Belters, who kind of live out by the asteroid belts, and they live in lower gravity. They spend a lot more time in spaceships or space stations. They don't live on a planet. And it's interesting stuff about physiologically how that's affected them, but also culturally. And there's a moment where there's like a character whose responsibility it was for like changing the air scrubbers or something, and he hadn't done that. Instead, he'd been like using cheaper ones to kind of make some extra money for himself. And then when people find out, like, that's like the ultimate betrayal, right? Because all of them rely collectively on the air that's coming through that, and by him, kind of
he's screwing everyone.
Exactly. And it unlocked something for me in terms of what a clan would be like. Being in a clan would be like for dwarves living underground in the mountains, where you've got the threat of the mountain falling on top of your head, plus you've got the threat of the Skaven and the greenskins and all, spores and all of the things that are potentially dangerous there, and how like egalitarian that society would have to be. So you still have nobles and royalty and things, but they wouldn't be like human nobles and royalty who look down on other people.
Different. Everyone's gonna pull their weight, or we're all gonna die.
Exactly. and that unlocked a thing in my head, and I'm like, oh, I really want to play dwarf now. I really want to explore that kind of psychology, and it totally fits with everything Lindsay said about the matriarchal society as well. So
so like kind of Grommadal, I think tying into that, a good way to explore that would be like for a regular dwarf, non-imperial dwarf. Like an imperial dwarf is going to have an understanding of human culture, human norms, all that kind of stuff. But like a regular dwarf, like humans are going to be annoying to them in a lot of ways. Of like this idea that like nobles are just these fat foppish people that don't do anything; they just collect money, instead of like where it's like we're dwarves. If you're a noble, it's because of your clan's importance. Like you're noble because you're master brewers, or you're master miners, or you're master smiths. Like they earned that. Like sure, like there is a little bit of nepotism. But you're still expected to pull your weight. Otherwise, you'll bring shame on your clan, shame to your ancestors. And that's a horrifying thing.
Exactly. And it would mean that, as they walk around through imperial society, like they would see most humans as deeply dishonorable, because they have their self-interest. They have that level of, they lack that commitment. And then that makes you see, and I've really played that into how Leopold views Sigmar in LAWhammer. Like, there's different aspects of Sigmar, but the big thing he believes in is unity, is bringing people together for that greater good, for that kind of collective. And so like, to my mind,
which is what Sigmar would want.
Exactly. But like Sigmar did that because Sigmar was a dwarf friend, because Sigmar understood what the dwarfs understood, that people were stronger when they all pulled together, and had to put aside self-interest in favor of kind of being a stronger whole. And it makes sense of why there is that continued relationship between the cult of Sigmar and the dwarfs, that there is a fundamental ideological, political agreement, belief that they both share. And that, again, that just made sense of a thing that always felt slightly random to me. So
when you were saying that about the dwarves finding everyone dishonorable, it kind of made me just realize the dwarves would literally be the unironic version of someone being like, people wouldn't go on the internet to tell lies. Like, who would do that? Tell lies? Like, nobody. Who would do that? It's like, dwarves would not do well with us.
No, they
would
really
struggle with humanity in so many ways.
We also, it's on a lighter note, we had a chat once about we were talking about dwarf culture and dwarf cultures, as you'll see what that means in a second, because we were thinking about like sourdough starters, and how there are some sourdough starters that are really, really old, and they're like a family legacy that gets passed on. And we're like, can you imagine like dwarf sourdough starters that are like millennia old? And they were like, that would be a great reason for taking the Slayer oath, right? If you inadvertently destroyed or killed or lost your clan's sourdough starter that was this unbroken line of tradition going back millennia, and then you soured it, and now your clan don't have their custom strain of bread anymore, so time to shave the head and go kill a troll.
That would honestly, even for a human, that would be nightmarish. Just losing like not even that old, but like for a dwarf, that would be. You'd struggle to avoid the slur up on that one. It'd be like I've got to. It's like that. That would be the first chaos or dwarf dedicated to Tzeentch because he's like, I need you to send me back in time to before this happens so I can fix it. It's the only way.
The only way.
Well, that's fantastic. All right, so we are like hilariously over time. We were supposed to go for like an hour, and it's been 2 hours. So
sorry.
no, you're all good. You're all good. Like I don't want to monopolize your time. But yeah. So chat, if y'all have got any kind of final questions to slip in, unless you've got to like go right now.
No, it's okay. Yeah.
But if anyone's got like a last minute question they want to slip in, this has been so awesome. There's so many like great little nuggets and all these things that I love the passion that you clearly have for it. It's like it's infectious and excellent. Like this is the best aspects of Warhammer is when people really are able to just love it for what it is.
Well, that's it. I mean, I've been playing in this playground for depressingly almost 40 years. So yeah, it's. I mean, maybe it is closer to 30 for me. I think.
Yeah. You gotta take those wins where you can get them.
In fact, I can put a date on it. Because the first white dwarf I bought, I looked it up on the internet today to check, was issue 127, which was summer of 1990. That was the first white dwarf that I bought, and I'd already played the older version of, I don't know if you make that, Hero Quest, which is like a board game that used Citadel miniatures. Like I played that and was into that a little bit, and then saw White Dwarf. It had a dragon on the front of it. I thought that looks cool. Bought it, and then got the White Dwarf every month for like the next 6 years or whatever.
That's how they get you, man. It's like I saw a dinosaur riding a bigger dinosaur and was like, for a 9-year-old me, that was like, I didn't realize that was an option. I could have an entire race of dinosaurs. It's funny. I still don't know why, but I have a distinct memory of 9 years old of when my parents saw Games Workshop and they took me in because they were like, this looks like a fun. I was not really into sports. They're like, this looks like great activity. And I don't know who the employee was at the time, but he did an amazing job selling my parents on it. He's like, oh yeah, they use math and rulers and it'll help with like his spatial reasoning and all this stuff and like high comprehension reading, which he was right, but it was a very weird angle to take for selling Warhammer.
It is the classic, like having like Andy Law and I both used to work for Games Workshop, and that is literally the pitch that you use. But because it is true,
it's true though. Yeah,
hand-eye coordination, creativity, all that stuff.
Like my reading comprehension level was awesome, but it's like I'll never forget going in and them being like, well, what are you really into? It's like, oh, I love dragons. They're like, oh, we got some dragons here. And I have no idea why, but I will never get my 9-year-old self being like, what's that on top of it? He's like, it's an elf. And it's like, ugh. And it's like, why did I not like an elf at that age? I had no context for not liking that elf.
I'm still not a big fan of elves. Yeah. I did joke with Lindsay yesterday that I was going to come on here and counter all of her pro-elf propaganda.
Well, when I was going to have Lindsay on, I was like, okay, I have to focus on like talking about why people like elves because it's such a meme. And especially the Total War community where people they fucking hate elves so much. There have been so many traumatic experiences from like in Warhammer 1, the Wood Elves. Like, there's a reason everyone calls Durthu Tree Hitler because everyone hated him so much because he was just a nightmare to deal with.
And in Wifrup, like they are correctly, but they are like super arrogant, and like that just as consistently in my PCs brought out. Weirdly, I love the Eldar in 40k though.
Really?
So I'm acknowledging my own hypocrisy there, but
I will never forget being young and listening to he must have been in his 40s or his 50s, but there was a man in my local hobby store. He fucking hated elves because he was a Mordheim player, and the elves would have like 3 guys on their Mordheim band versus 12, and they would win because they were just such bullshit. They were so strong.
Elf bullshit. That is the catchphrase that Dan has come up with for our stream. Elf bullshit. Whenever Element does something right.
Elf bullshit. Well, and it works for Warhammer lore too. It's like how do the elves fight so many wars and yet there's still so many of them? Elf bullshit. Don't worry about it.
Elf bullshit. I love the fact in our demon fight, like Lindsay genuinely by rolling well managed to pull off some classic elf bullshit. of like running past the door, looking in, seeing the demon, throwing a throwing knife, and getting a really good hit on it without breaking stride, and you're like, elf bullshit. But the dice don't lie. The dice tell the stories.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Yep. Awesome. Well, it looks like we're pretty much good to go. So thank you so much for coming on. This was a blast. This was so fun. I'm going to I guess I can turn off the recording aspect, and then I'll deal with the stream aspect, but because it's just easier to deal with that. But thank you all for watching. This is going to be the end of the recording or audio, whatever. So thank you, Andy, so much. Thank you so much for coming on. This was absolutely a delight.
It was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Be sure that you check out LAWhammer and the Rookery. I'll have links to those in the relevant places. You can see Andy on both of those. You can also see him playing Father Leupold in the LAWhammer campaign, where he's doing an absolutely fantastic job. And it's such a refreshing take on a Sigmarite warrior priest type character too. I mean, as much as everyone loves like the bald guy in heavy plate armor that just yells constantly and just is smacking people with hammers, there's a lot more nuance to be found within that character, and it's great to see that brought to life.
I mean, don't get me wrong. If I could get Andy to give me plate armor, I'd absolutely take it.
But, you know? I saw what happened to your armor the second you got it.
No.
I loved your I still technically achieved my short term.
The short term mission was to get it. It wasn't to keep it. It was to get it.
Yeah, it didn't even last a session. This is rough. Demons.
Yeah.
Demons.
Demons.
All right. Anyway, so that's that.